Hello everyone and welcome back to the Commander Experience. Today we are going to talk about one of the decks that we have mentioned a lot on the channel, and that's one of Brian's decks, and we're going to go through and see what inspired him building it and which pieces he have chosen to include. So today we're going to talk about Emry Lurker of the Loch and have Brian break it down for us and see what choices he made.
Let's do it. Okay, so a little bit of a short history behind the deck and what inspired me to building it. As many may know, I have a Muldrotha deck. Like I just told Jacob, I love talking Muldrotha, and every chance I get to talk about Muldrotha, I take it. But here we are again. But this time it's actually a bit relevant because my first experience with Emry was in my Muldrotha deck. It was just such a nice fit in Muldrotha, and being able to cast Lion's Eye Diamond out of the graveyard. Besides the one-off you have with Muldrotha casting Lion's Eye Diamond out of the graveyard, you can do so again with Emry, and that made it real flexible. But that was what inspired me to building Emry, because I just thought that getting Emry out for 1 milling 4 seemed like great value. So that was the first inspiration, and also it's also been fun for me building monocolored decks because they are not as strong as other 2 and 3 colored decks are in bracket 4. It's a bit difficult to building a narrow, so to say, in one color. So I've always liked that challenge, and Emry is just another example of me building a monocolored deck for bracket 4. So, besides me loving graveyard decks, there were no real inspiration behind building Emry, to be honest. Just that I wanted to build another graveyard deck. I've always loved the graveyard, and it being an artifact deck just opened up a lot of other cards than I usually play in other graveyard decks. So, this being artifact-centric was the pull, so to say. It was what got me excited. If we should just go quick over some of the lines that we're looking for and how the deck wins. I have a Aetherflux Reservoir in the deck that I can of course play out of the graveyard, and with some sort of infinite untap of Emry, which can be obtained by either playing Mirren Spy or Chakram Retriever. With those in play, you can just cast Lotus Petal or even a Tormod Script out of the graveyard over and over again and charge up Aetherflux Reservoir that way. I also run Displacer Kitten, so if I have Lightning Greaves or 1000-Year Elixir out giving Emry haste, I also have the possibility to just use Displacer Kitten to blink Emry and keep milling myself and obtain infinite mana that way, and also win with Aetherflux Reservoir that way. There are also some other lines in there. I do play Core Tapper and Magistrate Scepter for infinite turns, and other than that, the deck is really built up surrounded by controlling the game a bit and prolonging it a little bit for me to obtain the value pieces. I play Intuition and I play Gifts Ungiven to find these cards, because in a graveyard deck you don't really care about what is being put in the graveyard. And I do have some key pieces also for those, because as I mentioned earlier, the pieces I really want is Mirren Spy and Chakram Retriever and Displacer Kitten, but none of these are artifacts, so I do have a workaround for that we will cover a bit later on. But yeah, that's the deck, that's how it plays, and of course we have some synergy and some card choices that we're going to break down here over this episode.
Yeah, so that was a lot about how we win that deck. So just glancing over here, so how do we get there? What's the value plan until we get to win the game?
My favorite value plan is seeing cards like Urza's or Mishra's Bubble in the opening hand, because not only does it pseudo-ramp Emry, costing 1 less, but I also draw a card for 0 mana. So if I can get Emry out turn 1, which is, I think it happens like 50% of the games I play. It happens really often that I play Emry turn 1. I crack one of the bubbles, draw a card, and draw on my turn, playing the bubble for free for 0 mana out of the graveyard turn 2. So while it may not be the best value engine, I get to look at the cards or what my opponents are going to draw on their next turn, give me a little bit of insight into their deck by also drawing cards. And since it costs 0 mana, that gives me mana for other things, ramping or some other value piece that I see fit at the given time. What I'm also looking for is to get one of the big mana rocks down on the table fast, So by that I mean Gilded Lotus, Scepter of Eternal Glory, or Friend Dynamo, because I do run some untappers in the deck. So having these big mana rocks on the battlefield as soon as possible usually lets me untap them and gives me access to a lot of mana really early on. And if I reach 7-8 mana by turn 3, which is not unusual, it's pretty hard to stop the deck, because by then I can cast Intuition and Gifts Ungiven, and when I first cast these cards, it's pretty much game over if people are not wiping my board or something like that.
Yeah, quickly want to glance over the deck here and look at some of the card choices. Like, one of the things that I have a big tendency to do in blue is basically play a lot of clones and a lot of copy effects. And I don't see much of that here. Is that a specific choice? I know most of them are not artifacts, but I feel they are very powerful pieces most of the time.
It is kind of a choice, because as you already know, it's a balance game building an artifact deck. What are enough artifacts? What is not enough artifacts? And playing with that balance. So what I found out experimenting with the deck list was that you're really just searching for the right lines in Emry. Emry doesn't do a lot of cool things. She's an engine, and she doesn't win until she have the right pieces. So it's kind of a waiting game with Emry. And by that extent, it's also, to a certain extent, a control shell that you're building Emry with. Or that's at least the route I'm taking right now, trying to control the game a bit. And I think that's why I haven't chosen to put in clones. That said, I have chosen one, and that is, of course, an artifact. I'm playing Imposter Mech. It's actually a new card I'm trying in the deck. I do like the idea of Imposter Mech being a vehicle, meaning that it can be a Drannith Magistrate or an Esper Sentinel, and it's also not a creature now, so it's way harder to remove. So I do like that. And since I'm trying to build some sort of control / value package until I find my own win con, I do think that Imposter Mech is fitting that profile. But it's not an effect that I would love a lot at, because I don't think there's enough great creatures to copy. So I do think that one effect is good enough, and I've just chosen the one that I can play from the graveyard.
Yeah, I guess it also makes sense because the deck is narrow in a sense, so you need to copy very specific things for it being good for your deck.
Yeah.
So it's not just like other decks where it's worth it just to get some of the value.
If it's not being card draw or something like Drannith Magistrate or Opposition Agent, so either card draw or stacks, I think that's the two choices I have when playing a clone effect. The downside of Imposter Mech is, of course, it can only target your opponents, so I cannot make an extra copy of some of my own stuff, which you can usually do with clones, but that's just one of the downside I have accepted, because I want to have an artifact I can cast from the graveyard.
Also, when I looked at it first, and you mentioned in the shelf that you play some of these big mana rocks, and I can see there is some payoffs, but there isn't a lot, so it seems like my thought is, are you digging a lot, or are you very careful with your mulligans, or how do you get there? Because it seems like you're going to get a lot of mana, and there's not a lot of big things to use that mana on. When you have played the deck, do you feel like you get stuck, or you flood, what so to say, without it being lands necessarily, or is there always something to use the mana for?
Well, the hurdle I'm trying to solve right now is that, like you said, I have a way to make a lot of mana, and that's usually not the issue in this deck. I also run Unwinding Clock because I have some of the flash enablers in the deck. So with Unwinding Clock and, let's say, Liberator, Urza's Battle Thopter in play, I can just keep untapping and flashing in stuff from my hand. But as you said, my deck is not costing a whole lot, and that's one of the issues I have right now, and one of the challenges I'm trying to solve, because if I don't have anything useful to use that mana on, why even have that line of play? So what I've done right now is actually adding in Hullbreaker Horror, which I haven't run in the deck before. I have added Wandering Archaic to the deck, and I have added Consecrated Sphinx. I need something to cast and use my mana on until I find the pieces I need for me to win the game. And right now, those are the pieces I'm trying to use mana on, because it's pretty much just control, meaning a lot of removal and counter spells, and the rest really being draw engines or tutors. So it plays very one note, and that's one of the issues I've had with this deck, because it is either drawing cards or stopping my opponents, and not a whole lot to use the mana on when I have it. And I'm not sure if that is something I should try and solve, because I do need some mana when I try to win. Gifts Ungiven is 4 mana, so let's say I'm drawing Gifts Ungiven for my turn. If I have enough mana, I can try and win right there. Where if I don't have enough mana, I have to pass turn, cast it before I untap on my next turn, and try to win there. So now I have to wait another turn cycle, so to say, to try and win the game. So having enough mana sometimes can be enough for me to just try and win the game when I have the chance. So I wouldn't say having too much mana is a big problem, but it is a question I've asked myself. What am I using this mana for? And that is also the reason why I ran Mindslaver at some point, but I'm actually checking it out now, because with Mindslaver I could disrupt my opponents also. But it is a great question. Of course I have Ugin, I have the Storm, cost 7 mana, and
also cast like Uthros, Research Crest, even though it's not big mana, it still wants you to play a lot of cards, but kind of does the same. So that's a good new card included. Yeah, just when I saw the list and the keys, and when I hear the keys, I already have this deck in mind where you play Nessa Hall, or I can't remember the 9 mana thing where every opponent needs to sacrifice 3 creatures. Those kind of cards is the ones I'm thinking of in my head, because the key decks normally make like 10 mana on one turn, and you can play some stupid card very early on. And it's kind of interesting to see it being so different in that regard.
Yeah, Nessie is definitely one of the cards I've pondered when building this deck, but I was very conscious about not running Portal to Phyrexia, and that is because I don't run a lot of creatures that I want to reanimate myself. So if I don't use that ability on Portal, then I'm in the situations where does it provide enough value now? Because let's say I'm up against a Spellslinger deck, and you have 2 creatures because there's been a board wipe, and the last opponent may be having 1 creature. How much work does Portal to Phyrexia now do? And it still costs 9. So
yeah, definitely.
I just think it's too expensive to be running. But I also think that if you're running a Portal to Phyrexia in your deck, that, like you said, it would be another deck entirely, because then I do think you're running some creatures that will support those kind of cards. You would probably run a Jinkataxias or 2 and Nessa Hall and more expensive creatures.
Yeah, makes sense. It also seems, actually, when I look at the deck, it kind of in the same vein as we talked about before, but it seems like the mulligan in this deck is kind of hard, actually, exactly because there is a lot of mana, not too many payoffs, but if you get the right ones, as you said, Intuition and Gift Ungiven, it will be very powerful and quick. So it seems like the mulligan seems pretty hard, at least when I look at it.
Yeah, I do run into some non-games, meaning that I can have an actual okay hand, like I can play Emry turn 1, but it's through me having, let's say, Tormod's Crypt and maybe a Lotus Petal. Lotus Petal only gives me value here and now, unless I keep playing it, of course, and Tormod's value doesn't provide me with much more than just being able to cast Emry on turn 1. And then if Emry doesn't really hit anything to the graveyard, because it's not a self-milled deck, now she's kind of done her thing, and I have nothing in the graveyard of real value to play. So now it's all falling on what kind of cards do I have left in my hand, and if I've already cast Lotus Petal and Tormod's Crypt, then there's usually also a couple of lands, and now there's only 3 cards left in hand, and if those are not providing any real value, then I'm kind of stuck. And I've had those games where in my mind it was just, this is fine, because I'm probably going to hit something nice, like a 1 ring on the 4 cards I mill, and that has just turned out to be a bad mulligan strategy. So it's usually more important for me to have card draw these days in my hand than it is to play Emry on turn 1, because I always had this idea that Emry on turn 1 was vital to the plan, but it isn't really, because you can always just play her for 1 mana when you need her. She doesn't do a whole lot before you're trying to win, except in those cases where you have the bubbles in your opening hand, then you usually want to play her right away because you can keep casting them over and over again and gain value that way. But since it's not a self-milling deck, and maybe it should be, I do run cards like Ledger Shredder, and I do run some cards that put cards in the bin. I also run Nadiv, Devious Diver is also in the deck, and I do run a few cards that are putting cards in the yard, but not in a sense that I would call it a self-mill deck. So I do have those games where I get kind of stuck. So as you said, mulligan in this deck is a bit weird sometimes.
Makes sense, yeah. Yeah, it seems, but I have looked at some of other lists for Emry, and it seems like people have a tendency, and that's not really how your decks works as far as I can see, but people have a tendency to go a bit more all-in, so maybe they play a lot of the, what should we call these kind of effects, the bubble effects. Then they also play the chromatic star and a lot of the other Cheerio cards. And some of the other decks play like 20 of those cards, even the worst ones, that's like 2 mana and 0 to crack them. But it seems like you have run in a bit of the middle. And kind of understand, as you just described, why that it makes the mulligan harder, but it seems like when the deck runs, it will run a lot better because you don't run into all these weird cards that just draw your card early on.
Yeah, and I did actually run Chromatic Star also, one of the cards that I've taken out. Some of the cards I've also taken out is also due to that very same issue that we just talked about regarding what do I use the mana for. And that is all the discount pieces, like Ethereum Sculptor, for an example. I've taken them all out now because all my artifacts are already pretty cheap, so how much reduction do I actually get from playing those cards? I just felt they weren't doing enough. They weren't pulling their weight. Yes, of course, when you have that Gilded Lotus or Scepter of Eternal Glory in hand, and it costs 3 or 4 mana instead of 4 and 5, yes, that feels nice, but it's almost the only cards I want to discount on. So, also I'm trying out... Talking about that issue, I'm trying out Lady Octopus in the deck, and I haven't even played the deck with her in the deck yet, and I'm already thinking, but what are those artifacts I want to cheat into play? Because as we talked about just before, I'm not running Portal to Phyrexia, so what are the artifacts I'm hoping to get into play with Lady Octopus? How much value does she really provide? And the only reason right now that I'm still trying her out is that she gets around the timing restriction. So I can actually put artifacts into play from my hands before I untap. And I do think that mechanic has at least some value. So even if she's only putting a 2 mana artifact into play or 3 mana artifact into play, that you can do it instant speed, put it into play. She costs 1 mana. So I'm gonna try her out. Also, I do need some creatures in the deck because I'm running Dermo Taxi, and like I said earlier, I had some ways of circumventing that Mirror Spire and Chakram Retriever and Displacer Kitten is not artifacts themselves. Earlier I ran Encroaching Mycosynth, but that is 4 mana, so I do think that's a bit expensive. So now I'm trying out Dermo Taxi instead. So what I can do is, of course, with Intuition, tutor for Dermo Taxi, and maybe Lion's Eye Diamond and Mirror Spy. So no matter what combination of cards you give me in my hand, I will have Dermo Taxi in the graveyard or in hand, being able to make it into a copy of Mirror Spy, for an example. But in order for Dermo Taxi to work, I do need to have 2 creatures in play that I can tap. So that is also one of the reasons that I'm looking into how many creatures do I have in my deck, because I do need some amount of creatures in the deck to make Dermo Taxi work. So Lady Octopus is also filling that spot.
Yeah, makes sense. And also say the new Euphros also need some creatures. I know that Lady Octopus doesn't help with that, but creatures in general.
Yeah. That was also the reason I was adding Wandering Archaic and Hullbreaker, and actually also the reason I was adding Harbinger of the Seas, because as we talked about in our Stacks episode, I'm not a huge fan of Stacks effects in general, but I do think Harbinger of the Seas provides more than just that in my deck, because as I talked about, I need creatures on the battlefield for Dermo Taxi, and I also need creatures on the battlefield with power, being able to enable Euthros Research Craft when I have that in play. So since am running a bit of a control plan anyway, I'm trying out Harbinger of the Seas. I'm not sure it's staying, but for now it's a card I'm gonna try and see how it works out.
It's very interesting to see the deck, and after having this conversation, a lot of choices makes a lot of sense. But it's cool to see that when I see your deck here, we build decks in very different ways. I have a tendency to go very deep into one mechanic, and as I talked about before, if I put some serial cards into my deck, I have a tendency to put 15 in. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but I have a tendency to go very deep into one thing. And when I look at your deck, you seem, to me, it seems like you're a lot more all over the place. But I have played against the decks and it works great. So it's just interesting to see. It's very far from how I build decks.
And one could say that your style of building decks also has its benefit because, as I already admitted, it does run into some issues sometime. It's still winning above 25% as far as I remember. So, and I'm still tinkering a lot with it. It being a new deck of mine, I'm still tinkering a lot with it. Funny enough, some of the cards I'm actually questioning if they're good enough, if I need to make it more powerful and more reliable. Is cards like Euthros, when we reviewed that card to begin with, it was like our opinion that it's one of the best draw mechanics in artifacts decks. What I found out, and I haven't actually had Euthros in hand that many times, so it's still pending. But it seems like the hurdle in an artifact deck is bigger than one could imagine, being that you have to have enough creatures out to enable it fast. Because casting it turn 2, if it's not online before turn 4, is it really doing its thing? And I'm not sure it's quick enough, to be honest. But it just reads so well, so I'm still going to try it out. Like I said, I haven't had it in hand that many times, so I'm still going to try it out. And I had the same question with Ugin, Eye of the Storms. It just reads so well. Shouldn't this be a slam dunk in any artifact deck?
I will say, of course, it works when it works, so that's a bit of a thing. But I will say the one time we saw it, it was pretty insane and basically took over the whole game. And I know if you cast a 7-mana spell, it should kind of do that to be worth it. So you could say, of course it did that. But I think Ugin is probably, in my book, I don't know, I've only seen it once, but in my book, it seems like one of the best artifact payoffs that have been
it is
made for a long time.
Pretty crazy. And like you said earlier, what are you using all the mana for? So having some big value pieces that you're able to cast. And the game you were talking about, I do think I actually had Liberator, Urza Spell thumped out, and that card in particular doesn't say artifact spells, it says colorless spells. So I was able to cast Ugin instant speed, and of course doing that is just stupid because now you both get the cast ability and you get the static ability, so being able to cast that instant speed is, of course, powerful. I do remember that when you talked about the clones, I didn't mention Mirror Maid, and I do actually also run Mirror Maid right now.
Oh, yeah,
so I can make clones of either bigger artifacts if I already have them, or I can just copy an Ristic Study or something like that.
Yeah, makes sense. I think Mirror Maid is really one of those cards that is having a comeback here. Seems so strong in so many decks. I think that that was all the question on my mind currently for the deck. I think it looks cool, and having played against it works pretty well.
Yeah, I'm always having fun playing graveyard decks, and getting this to work is a challenge and one I'm happily to accept. So I'm still gonna tinkering with it. It plays just so very different than the other graveyard decks I have. So I will keep tinkering with this one. And closing thoughts could be that I'm also trying out right now. I'm both trying out Spider Sense and Louisoir's Sacrifice in the deck. Both of them give me the ability to either bounce Emry back to hand or sacrifice it. Spider Sense, you can use the web slinging. You need to return a tapped creature to your hand, and usually you have a pretty easy time of tapping Emry. So you can counter target instant spell, sorcery, or triggered ability with Spider Sense with just 1 mana. That seems pretty good. And bouncing it doesn't really hurt you in this plane, because you can usually just pay it for 1 mana again, milling 4 more cards, which will then make you search for your winning pieces. And Louisoir's Sacrifice does hurt a little bit more, because you have to sacrifice it or pay 2 mana extra, and then you can counter target activated ability, triggered ability, or non-creature spell for just 1 mana. And I do think that's a real powerful ability, and if you cast this in mid-game, it will usually mean that Emry still only costs 1 mana, even with the command attacks anyway. So I do think this is worth running, and it is 2 cards that both controlling the game and giving me value, meaning that it gives me the option of casting Emry again and milling 4 cards.
Yeah, I haven't actually seen. I didn't even see the cards in there, but it makes a lot of sense. The first card on my mind when I see these cards is like snap or something like that. If that's worth it to snap your own commander or another thing, but yeah, that's cool. That's some cool tech.
A card that is very similar to the 2 cards we just talked about is also Flare of Denial. I actually also put that in the deck now, and this is just a free counter spell where you sacrifice a non-token blue creature. And besides Emry, I do run a few creatures in this deck, since I want creatures in the deck, as we talked about earlier, to station Earthros. So, but it also gives you again the option of sacrificing Emry if you would like that, and just play her again. So another free counter spell in the deck just seems like a good fit here.
Yeah, that seems like the best one, actually. That's pretty good. Another Fierce Guardianship, basically, in this deck.
Yeah, and we also talked about how the deck is winning, and of course, Hullbreaker Horror also runs all the infinite lines with the mana rocks, of course, getting infinite mana, and with infinite mana, I can usually just also draw my deck with some of the artifact pieces that draws cards, either Conjurer's Bubble or something like that.
Yeah, I also see that there is Dramatic, Reversal, and Scepter, which makes sense.
There are a lot of lines to get a lot of value, so they're usually just used for digging for my win con. But that was Emry, Lurker of the Loch. This is how my decks look at the current time of recording. It will probably change a lot over the next few months. Right now, I can tell you that I've just subbed out 22 cards. So the list we just talked about haven't even seen its first game yet from all the substitutions. So it is a deck that I'm tinkering a lot with and trying to find that balance, so it won't run into as many games where it just gets stuck. But this is how it runs for now. But thank you for tuning in, and if you have an Emry deck of your own and you want to share some nice combos or value pieces, tell us about them in the comments. You can also join our Discord community, of course, ask questions and talk with the other members. But other than that, see you in the next one.
See you in the next one, everyone. Thanks for watching.